Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning. I'm Martha Rogers, and I welcome you to this episode of Ethical Perspectives on the News. I think often about what it takes from all of us to be healthy together, to maintain a healthy working environment, to have a place that's healthy where we can play together and live together and work together. And I think it begins with respect. And for me, that means not allowing language to get in the way, maybe even a minor violent way of each other. You don't show respect through derogatory language or demeaning words. And anything that devalues or demeans another in language is not appropriate for me in a place that we are seeking health. I think people really want to contribute when they're together. I think they want to thrive. I think they want to give back to their community or their workplace. But as soon as we throw out a label that might demean them, they shrink back, or emotions get in the way. And well, my panelists here gathered with us this morning know more about that than I do. But I think I'm going to ask them about living in a world where we throw out labels freely. You know, sometimes I think that's a good thing. You know, I can say to people, I'm a teacher, and I'm very proud of that. Or I'm a clergy person, or I'm blonde, or I'm married. And those can be good things. So labeling, I think, can help at times. But labels tell you a lot about people, and if I offer them, that's one thing. But if somebody puts them on me, that's another thing. But then I get worried when I hear about labels put on persons like, say race, black, or say welfare recipient for income levels, and automatically we make snap judgments with labels. And so I'd like to explore that with all of you this morning. I think you're the experts. So let me introduce you. Seated to my left here, I would like to welcome LaSheila Yates. LaSheila is the Executive Director of the Cedar Rapids Civil Rights Commission. I'm glad you're here, LaSheila. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Roy is seated next to LaSheila, Roy Porterfield, who's a civil rights advocate in our community and has been for years. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that, Roy. And to round out our panel is Alison Bianchi. You're a sociologist and a director of the Center for the Study of Group Processes at the university.
Yes, I am.
Well, welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd like to just start a little. Why don't you tell me a little bit about, Alison, let's start with you. What does a director of the Center for the Study of Group Processes and your sociology background and work do?
So the University of Iowa has 33 research centers. We're very proud of that, and I'm also very proud to be the director of one of them, the Center for the Study of Group Processes. We conduct studies that examine group dynamics, and especially a lot about the things that you're talking about, how some get labeled and that affects group dynamics, how some get categorized, which I will elaborate on a little bit more, and on how that changes group dynamics, and how we often do these things sometimes non-consciously. We don't do them on purpose, or we do them like you just talked about, the snap decision that changes things within groups. We also do a lot of studies of exchange and political attitudes. We aren't just sociologists at the center. We invite psychologists, political scientists, economists, any kind of social scientist that wants to study examining group dynamics. But I actually specialize in examining things like race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and how those kind of social categories, you refer to them as labels, may in fact change group dynamics.
You're the right person to round out our
I kind of am, yes.
You're here. And Roy, tell us a little bit about your work in the civil rights area.
Well, it's been various things. I started in 1982. At that time, I had twice been fired from jobs because I'm gay. Well, I heard that some legislation had been introduced in Congress that would make that illegal. At that time, the only civil rights protections of any state in the country was Wisconsin. One of the few cities in the nation was Iowa City that protected people on grounds of sexual orientation. So when I heard that there was something in Congress pertaining to that, I gathered a group of people, and we began lobbying then Congressman Jim Leach to support it. He ultimately didn't, but still that was sort of the beginning of trying to push for my own civil rights. And over the years, I've become more aware of other things. Well, let's see, I know LaSheila because I served as a commissioner on the Civil Rights Commission and the chair of that body a couple of times some years back. So I've kind of spread things out as I've seen. It's not just personal. If everybody doesn't have civil rights, then who does?
Well, and it seems that we have a lot of derogatory use of labels in that arena, so I'm so glad you're on our panel.
I've heard many of them directed at me over the years,
Yeah,
so
I'm sorry. And I'm glad you're
that.
redeeming that by volunteering in a healthy way.
Thank you.
LaSheila, Civil Rights Commission in Cedar Rapids.
Yes, I'm the executive director of the Cedar Rapids Civil Rights Commission. I've had an opportunity to serve the commission in different capacities. I started off as an investigator with the commission where I worked with Roy and had an opportunity to look at cases. We are an administrative law agency. We enforce Chapter 69 of the Cedar Rapids Municipal Code. We have had a great opportunity in the last year to perform a partnership through a 28E agreement with the City of Marion, where we provide professional staffing services and enforce their ordinance as well. One thing about our commission, we have an opportunity for those who don't have the ability or the capability to hire an attorney to look for an opportunity to remedy any violation they feel as a violation of their civil rights. We have an opportunity to provide them with free services and go through an administrative process. And at the end of the day, they find out whether or not, it's legal cause for discrimination. So I really feel thrilled to have an opportunity to serve my community in that capacity. I'm definitely a government administrative person at heart, but I also think it's important for those who paved the way for me, that have advocated, that have allowed the laws to be in place to be recognized, and I stand on their shoulders.
Well, you just make the panel so well balanced. Thank you for your gift to our community too in your work. Let's jump right in. Why do people need to label? We're all guilty of it. We all do it, both negative and positively. Why? What purpose does it serve?
I think that, Martha, you're using the word labeling as a way I would use the word categorizing.
Okay.
I think that as a species, actually, not to sound like a professor here, but here we go. As a species, we categorize. It's how human beings have been able to work in groups and how we've been able to adapt so well. Categorization means that we can look at a symbol or an idea and understand that it applies to many, many different situations, and we're able to kind of quickly make decisions without really thinking a whole lot, and so we're able to process a lot of information. That's great. That's very human. The problem is that some of the information that we store in our minds with these categories are not so great. And we may not even be aware that we're doing it. We become really kind of socialized. We internalize beliefs. We talked about the media a little bit, interaction. We now have the internet. Lots and lots of ways in which information can get stored. And we process things so quickly sometimes that we don't recognize that we're actually labeling or using stereotypes in order to, within our interactions. And so the answer to it is that there are positive sides of categorization. If we had to make decisions and understand new social information, every new bit of social information that we got, we'd never get out of bed in the morning. We'd never be able to get out and do the things that we need to do. We're highly adaptive with the symbolic interactionism that we do. But the negative side of it is, of course, when the bad information from history, from our culture, from interaction is stored along with these things, and it's called up, and sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it. And so for me, categorizing and labeling is like all human endeavor. It's a double-edged sword. It's great on the one hand, not so hot on the other.
And with categorizing and labeling comes the words, in my mind, having prejudice, stereotyping, all of that is kind of the same umbrella.
I mean, the information we can store is things about people's competence based on different kinds of social categories, or whether or not this person should be treated certain ways, or even acts of violence against the person. If we internalize images and ideas and things within culture and our history, and we act upon these without thinking, I think that's the really, really insidious side of labeling and stereotyping and categorization.
What are some of the effects of that type of negative categorizing, or I want to say labeling because it's stuck in my mind?
Right.
It divides people. It stunts opportunity. It can end up, preventing people from taking opportunities if they're discriminated against. It can lead to all kinds of negative self-worth feelings if somebody is constantly barraged with words putting them down. So it can spread through your entire psyche if you keep hearing things like that from people outside your group. And of course, groups will try to do that to other groups to increase their own power, or perhaps members of the group believe that everybody else in the group feels that way, and so to try to fit in, even if they don't believe those stereotypes that firmly, they may profess to try to get an advantage in the group that they're trying to be part of.
And I would definitely agree with just labeling and just how it does have it's so pervasive in a certain extent where when it does get to the point where it becomes stereotyping, and even in some situations where it may seem that a label is affirming, it still has an adverse impact. For example, our African Americans, if there's a statement that African Americans are good at athletes, that really demeans the ability for that group to be intelligent. You have to really take a step back and think, okay, I may have been taught this. This is something that I've seen traditionally in my environment, but what negative impact does it have? And a lot of time, for someone to challenge a stereotype, it may be a challenge of their social support system, their family, who's taught them that. And but it does have a negative impact when it prevents individuals from having employment opportunities, housing opportunities. Those are the types of cases that we see through the Civil Rights Commissions that are still our primary areas of discrimination. And here it is, 2015.
Right.
I'm just preparing for tonight a song from a musical in 1949, long before some of your times. Came into my mind in South Pacific, and the lieutenant says you've got to be carefully taught to hate those who are different than you, or to fear those who are different from you.
And all the people
that,
your relatives hate. That's the
that's
lyrics.
the song.
It's one of my favorite songs, right?
And I wonder if some of those negative emotions aren't some of what I would call the categorizing, the labeling, if that's an avenue to release emotions that are inappropriately placed, and I guess where I'm leading to is I've seen so much, and I'm going to bring up the media, social media, television, newspapers, where they're labeling and already jumping into the first or second step of bypassing relationships with people, in that, a black cop shot a white man or vice versa, and that's already a label that people are jumping into, and it jumps into a situation where I'm afraid we lead to more violence with each other. And I remember studying something about that long back.
Well, and unfortunately, social media allows people to be as anonymous as they choose. And therefore, if they have some deep, dark feelings that society has, sort of expressed disapproval of in real life, if you will, now all of a sudden people can express those dark feelings online. And you'll find in all kinds of online forums and things, people expressing rage against people that they clearly have little or no knowledge of, and they feel absolutely, there's nothing to stop them.
So for that lack of contact with them, because of some of the media outlets and technology we have right now, is it more easier to label or jump into some of that?
People can feed on each other's negative emotions in an online forum, because they get approval. They find that, my mother always told me if I said those kind of things, she'd wash my mouth out with soap. Well, now I find that there are hundreds of people out there who agree with me and will say things just as nasty as I will on this blog. So unfortunately, there's a lot of reinforcement in social media.
Well, and mom won't be turned in for child abuse anymore. We're showing our age understanding that.
Right. I think that interestingly, the internet is really again, it's that double-edged sword. There's been a lot of opportunity for awareness, spreading awareness, getting people who may not have interacted or understood diversity, different kinds of things, different kinds of individuals, right? It's actually, there's that positive side, but then there's also been a lot of studies actually affirming what you're saying, that that people can have these really, really kind of, I call them deviant and kind of horrible attitudes towards other individuals, and they're affirmed because they feel legitimized by someone that puts it out there. So yeah, we have to learn new ways to be careful with the social media for the expression of emotion and prejudice and stereotype that you talked about.
I wonder, even when considering that you can be kind of anonymous, right. Are we going to get to a point where folks are not expressing those types of attitudes in a face-to-face direct contact, but that they're then kind of regressing back to behind the scenes and playing nice in front of others. So I wonder if that's going to be a new norm.
It's a really, really good question, and I think that that's kind of what we need to do, is to continue studying this to see if, in fact, the impact of Facebook and Twitter and blogs and other forms of social media are actually reinforcing and making these negative stereotypes and understandings even more persistent than they already are. Again, we're really, really at the beginning of studying these things, but there's a lot of affirmation to it's creating better avenues of persistently bad stereotyping.
But, as long as we're on that double-edged sword, let's look at the good side of it.
Right.
For example, there's been the national project of It Gets Better to tell
Right.
Gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth that you may be going through some difficulties now. You may feel isolated. You may be somewhat persecuted, put down, but it gets better. And it's a national program of people who are sometimes well-known, sometimes just prominent in their field. It might be somebody who's risen to a top engineering position in a corporation. There's a small-town fire department in Oregon, I believe, where the entire fire department put out a video on this thing. It Gets Better, telling how this fire
Right.
department has a couple of gay
Right.
members, and how they have grown to be absolutely, totally respected members of the community.
And it
part of the
reaches
fire
kids
department.
that maybe would never have been reached
Yes.
And
prior
there's-
to the internet.
there's
And
an
that's the
example.
positive side of
And now
the
the gay
awareness
kid
and
knows that he or
understanding
she can
and
grow up to be a
connection.
firefighter.
That's right.
And there's
Isn't
that
wasn't
group
there.
identity then,
Right.
where it's a positive thing.
Right.
LaSheila, in your work and your commission's work, do you see some of the positive as well as the negative influences, or are you mostly working with negative influences of categorizing and?
Well, with our commission, one thing that we're trying to do is to better educate about what discrimination is and what it isn't. It creates a great opportunity for us to share what our commission does. There are some things that fall with kind of outside of the scope of services. That's why we need organizations like Diversity Focused and some of the other grassroots organizations to support some of the more advocacy work. But mostly what we see now is housing issues based on disability and race, and employment issues based on disability and race. It's desperate treatment, being treated differently because of a person's race. In comparison to another individuals, those are most of the cases that we see. In housing, the same way. Housing particularly, we have seen persons not allowed to have reasonable accommodation because of their disability. So, and that's kind of what we see at the national level as well.
So when they come to you, or some of your own experiences, Alison and Roy, is it a language thing? Is it a behavior thing? What could our viewers as well as ourselves learn from this kind of discussion? Do we watch our language because it's so powerful, and how we use and apply words, or is it opportunities in our behavior that we limit with other people because we've categorized them by labeling them somehow?
All of the above, and it can escalate. I mean, somebody can start with just saying harsh words to somebody whom they perceive to be of a different group that they can't identify with. And then, later, instead of just saying words, are you actually doing something? Are you failing to hire or promote those people in your business? Do you begin to be accepting of violence against that group? Do you then find violence against that group acceptable, and you might do it yourself, and so on? I mean, this can go all the way up to the point of, murder, genocide, things like that. So I'm afraid that it can escalate, which is why something as simple as words, not that simple.
Right.
I think words can hold a lot of violence.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think we realize that, because once they're unleashed forever. And if they're said in that demeaning and derogatory, even without, like Alison said at the beginning of this program, without us being aware, we talk about those people and then...
Right. And I like what Roy just said, because LaSheila deals with the law, right? The litigious side of this, the breaking of the law. I deal with, so it's the de jure part I call it. I deal with the de facto things that Roy was talking about that may not necessarily be against the law, but are the beginning of the escalation where these things can really, really go wrong. And so it's not just, for me, it's not just language, but people who are in positions of power need to be made very, very aware. They need to be courageous enough to delegitimize these beliefs and just have a zero tolerance of these kinds of things, and then allow people the space to say, oh, I made a mistake and I wasn't aware, and allow them the space to learn. I really think, like, for example, recently we had the disturbances in Baltimore. My husband's a professor at Towson University, so I'm well aware of what was happened there. And the mayor stood up and used the word thug, which has lots and lots of racial connotation, to label some of the young people that were doing. They were breaking laws in Baltimore at the same time. It was kind of a derogatory thing. But she kind of quickly came back and apologized and said, I wasn't really all that aware that was a thing, and I appreciated that she did that, and I give her the space to say, I wasn't aware, I'm educated on that now, and from now on I know better, so I'm going to do better.
To me,
so
that's
kind of
growth
how exactly
strength.
That's kind of how I think that there's actually a lot of hope with this. I know that we're coming at it and we're talking about the negative things, but people have the ability to adapt and change, and I think that they have the ability to become aware, become educated, to become more involved. It's just a question of getting the engagement and the activity to do it. But I do think that these things can be stopped at a level before they escalate to much more deleterious things, and we all kind of have the power to do that.
And we do have to realize that there's a human element, and we have to grant others grace, because we all make mistakes.
Absolutely. And we live in such a diverse society, we're going to mess up. We're going to say something unintentionally that's going to whatever, and we have to become, lose the pride a little bit and say, wow, I made a mistake, I wasn't aware of this, and from now on, you bet I'm not going to do that, because that has the potential for creating the spiral that Roy was talking about. So,
well, the interesting thing, I did not realize until very, very recently that the word thug had racial implications, because it didn't used to.
Right.
And I have not happened to have been around people who were commonly using the word, therefore I hadn't noted the change in the connotation of it. And I realized that, and I don't think I'd made any bad mistakes in using the word recently, but now I know that is a loaded word, and it didn't used to be.
Right.
Things change.
And human beings are creative enough to use other words and language in order to mean this kind of the same things that they're talking about. So I think that it is a language issue as well as an awareness issue and an enactment issue. Once we know better, we do better.
So to empower children especially as our role modeling to use the language appropriately, to give grace and space for us to learn and change as our vocabulary takes on new meanings, and to be able to learn. I think we're always learning, but I think it's that heightened sensitivity I was really hoping that we'd hit tonight for our viewers. We need to be so aware and so sensitive, don't we?
And I even say it from even a personal aspect. I'm originally from Louisiana. My husband is from Chicago. And when my godfather first met my husband, he's like, labeled him as a city slicker. And I'm like, whoa, I hadn't processed that way, processed it that way. I'm like, well, I have to think about, well, what does that mean to him? How does he identify or even come to think or frame a person as a city slicker? What meaning does that have, especially from someone who grew up in rural Louisiana? And I'm like, just even thinking about it in that context, we have to, this world is changing. We are, still getting closely connected. And even with that connectivity, we have to understand that there's a lot of opportunity to reframe some of this negativity into a positive light. And how do you do that? My husband's not a city slicker, but he's from the city. He's from the city.
And I grew up with a book that was the city mouse and the country mouse, and that was just a word that happened. Mm-hmm. So that's another example of how the heaviness of language can mean one thing to another, and it can not have any meaning to somebody else. So it's that sensitivity once again. We have like 1 minute left. What's a final word? A quick final word.
Respect. Just treat people with respect. Find out how they wish to be addressed. If you use a word to somebody that you thought was neutral or positive and you can see they're taken aback by it, talk. Ask. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used that. What should I have said instead?
And the
Something
same
like that.
goes for the written word too, on Facebook, on computers, and communication with each other.
Be okay with being re-educated. Life is a continuous educational experience for me. The connotations change all the time, and just be open to them. And don't be insulted if somebody corrects you. Use that as an opportunity, and hopefully that other person will give you the space to say, that wasn't my intention, but now I know better.
Sure.
Check your assumptions at the door and grant others grace when they have made assumptions, because we do it, all of us do it at times, so just grant others grace.
It's human,
Well,
but we can do better.
On that parting wisdom, I think I'll say thank you for being here this morning, and thank you to our viewers too. If anything, through our discussion this morning, I hope we'll realize the power of our behavior and our language and what we are conveying, and hope we get it to align with the grace and the goodness that's in all of us. Thank you for attending our presentation this morning, and I want to remind you that you can go to YouTube and Google Ethical Perspectives on the News, and you can see all of the previous programs. They're posted there on YouTube for your enjoyment, and don't forget to like us on Facebook. Thank you to KCRG and to the Interreligious Council who have made today's program possible. I'm Martha Rogers signing off, and I challenge you to live more ethically. Good morning.